What's up, everybody? Welcome to The Sweat. I'm Jessie Coffield. Week 13 in the NFL has officially come and gone, so let's bring in DraftKings contributors Jeff Ulrich, Gary Thorne, and Matt Meiselman to take a first look at salaries for Sunday's main slate. Week 14, baby. All right, let's start with quarterback. Jeff, whose salary do you like?
I'm just going to go straight to the top, not quite the actual top, but close. Josh Allen, 7,800, going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, there's one thing we know at this point in the season. It's that the Tampa Bay Bucs are going to pass the ball, and teams playing them are going to pass the ball. And Buffalo, coming off a game where they couldn't pass the ball because it was played in a snowy blizzard in a snow globe, is probably going to be eager to get back to their roots, which is passing the ball here. This is a very good spot. The Bucs defense, good defensive line. They also made Carson Wentz look very good a couple weeks ago, 300 yards. 3 touchdowns. Josh Allen, last time I checked, is a lot better than Carson Wentz. I think you just don't overthink this one. You play Josh Allen in the obvious narrative, bounce back spot, whatever you want to call it. It's just a really good matchup.
What do we think, Gary, and which quarterback are you going with?
Yeah, so I agree with Jeff. I think you're going to want to attack that particular game in a lot of different ways, but he's pretty much outlined that. He stole my answer. So I'm going to steal the answer that he wanted to give, that Emerson, if he were here,
oh no!
Oh boy!
This is the week, guys. This is the week that Trevor Lawrence finally looks like the first overall pick in the NFL draft. It's happening. The Tennessee Titans cannot stop the pass. They are absolutely terrible defending the pass. There's a reason they've given up the second most DraftKings points per game to opposing QBs. There's a reason across the last 3 weeks they are giving up 7.4 yards per attempt, the third worst mark in all of football. This is a team that let Mac Jones go over 300 yards, and you can see how the Patriots feel about Mac Jones throwing the football. This is a team that let Trevor Siemian come within 2 yards of the 300-yard bonus. It's finally happening, $5,100. I know he's only thrown 1 touchdown since Halloween. Don't know how that's possible, but if you go through his game log, he has been able to take advantage, or at least his best games have come against really poor defenses, and that includes arguably his best game of the season against the Tennessee Titans back in the first half of the year. So $5,100, no one's going to want to use him because the stink is just on him right now, but I kind of like Trevor Lawrence in GPPs.
I mean, the stink is definitely on him. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I like both of those calls. Allen and Brady, it might just be hard to afford all the different pass catchers in their game, but I do think that game, it is the highest total of the week, I think rightfully so. The Jaguars are really, really cheap, so even if you don't think they're good, they're easy to afford too. I think the game that might go overlooked a little bit is Dallas-Washington. There's no one that seems like a value necessarily on either of these teams, but there's a lot of upside for the Dallas offense. They haven't put it together that often this season, but we've seen it over the past handful of years. Dak Prescott, obviously still a really good quarterback. Taylor Heineke and Terry McLaurin just as a stack there. I think the Washington offense, low-key, has gotten a little bit more concentrated lately. So McKissick is out. Logan Thomas is out. It might hurt the effectiveness of the offense slightly, but playing a stack like Heineke with Gibson with McLaurin, now that those two really are the focus of the offense, I think that makes a lot of sense.
All right, Gary, and we're going to running backs. Who do you like here?
Well, I gave a kind of value play at quarterback, so I feel like I'm allowed to just go really, really easy at running back. And right at the top of the board, you find Austin Eckler. I just think the volume and the matchup are too great here to ignore him completely. I know he's $8,300. Not exactly the most expensive week at running back. It's a really interesting slate in that sense. But Eckler in his last 4 games has scored 7 touchdowns. And in that span, he's also averaging 6.5 targets per game. And he converts, or tends to convert, a lot of his targets, at least does at a very high rate. The Giants, by DVOA, the second worst run defense in all of football. This is just one of those spots where the player, the situation, the volume is all too great for me to pass up.
All right, Gary's going straight to the top of the board. Matt, where are you going at running back?
So I had 2 guys circled here. One of them is Austin Eckler. And if Keenan Allen doesn't play this week, I think that Eckler probably has to do a little more in the passing game too. There are a bunch of running backs where we don't really know the situations. There's a lot of pending injury information where it's just like a lot of teams we're not sure of. But one team that is a little more clear is Las Vegas Raiders. Kenyon Drake got hurt this past week, and Josh Jacobs actually caught 9 passes. Even though he seem to like emerge in more of a role than what he's had this year, because normally he's just the running back and doesn't really play on passing downs. Jalen Richard is also out. Like, I think Jacobs could just wind up playing almost every snap for this team going forward, but they're big underdogs in Kansas City. And because of that, I think that people are probably going to want to shy away from the running back on the side of the game where they're probably going to lose. I think people saw what happened the last time the Raiders played the Chiefs, and the game wasn't particularly close. So I think that Jacobs probably winds up being pretty contrarian. We'll kind of have to see how the rest of this running back landscape shakes out, but I like Jacobs a lot this week.
All right, Jeff, who are you going with?
So I'm going to go, again, I mean, I paid up a quarterback, so I'll follow the rules here, and I'll go try and go value here. I mean, I kind of like the other side of this Chargers game as well. I mean, we're talking about, player usage in the pass game and stuff like that. Saquon Barkley, 9 targets last week. He's, potentially just going to be playing more and more snaps here as the season progresses as well. And, I mean, look, the Chargers it's a nice win, but, this is just a Jekyll and Hyde team. I mean, this is a team that has been terrible against the rush for most of the year. They're certainly capable of allowing a 50-yard touchdown to Saquon Barkley or just a big game in general. And I mean, the Giants, they can't really throw downfield. So I expect Barkley's pass usage to stay consistent here. And it's been very consistent over the last few games. He's only 6K. But, with the type of just volume he's got in this matchup, I mean, this is probably a really good spot where you get that long touchdown and you get that 25-point game. So I actually quite like Saquon Barkley here.
All right, Matt, take me to wide receivers. Tyreek Hill is the most expensive guy on the board at 8,500.
Darian and Jeff have already mentioned this game to a decent extent, this Giants-Chargers game. And the big thing for me is Keenan Allen. So he may not play this week due to COVID protocols. And if that happens, everything just gets a lot cheaper. So Mike Williams, I think, probably makes the most sense. He's not that cheap, but I think he's still way underpriced at $6,000. If there's no Keenan Allen, he becomes the number one option on the team. And then you have guys like Jalen Guyton and Josh Palmer, who I'm not sure which one it would be, but one of those two players is probably starting alongside Williams. And then on the Giants side, there's a bunch of wide receiver injuries too. We have Tony, Golladay, and Shepard have all been dealing with various injuries. There's a chance that all of those guys are out. So maybe John Ross, Darius Slayton, there could be some very cheap options. This could be a really good place to save some money this week.
Jeff, who are you rolling with at wide receiver?
Yeah, wide receiver is interesting. I mean, there's a few injuries obviously we need to keep an eye on. Deebo Samuel questionable as well. It could open up Brandon Ayuk for a pretty good game and what I think could be a higher scoring game between San Francisco and Cincinnati. But I'm just going to target Jamar Chase for now at 6,900. I think this is a better than advertised spot. I mean, we saw DK Metcalf bounce back a little bit against San Francisco. San Francisco has stopped the pass, but it really hasn't been because their secondary is playing so good. They really don't have a ton of athletes back there. It's just because they've been running the ball efficiently, and the other teams just haven't been able to get the ball. We saw that flip a little bit when Russell Wilson connected on some big plays last week. I think Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase can bounce back here as well. And I like this. I mean, where Jamar Chase is, he's had a few down weeks now. People are starting to get on T. Higgins. He's down in price. There's still other players around him who are probably going to suck up a little bit of ownership. But I think this is a very good spot to get back on Jamar Chase at 6,900 against, again, a pass defense that's been good, but I just don't think they're quite as good as their stats have really indicated over the last 3 weeks.
All right, Gary, talk to me.
I'm going to go with Elijah Moore at $5,900. Since the beginning of Week 9, the Saints have been giving up 9.6 yards per target to opposing wide receivers. That is the worst mark of any team in the NFC. In that same span of time, Elijah Moore is averaging over 20 DraftKings points per game. His target share the past 3 weeks has been over 30% each and every week, and that's likely not going to change with the news that Corey Davis is out for the remainder of the season after undergoing surgery. So this is kind of an interesting game. You've got two struggling defenses, specifically defenses against the pass, and maybe the two worst starting quarterbacks in the league on either side of this game. So how much you want to invest in a contest like this is really up for debate, but I think Moore is a nice, safe play who also happens to have a massive ceiling.
All right, let's move to tight ends. Your favorite position, Jeff, who are you going with?
Well, I guess I'm going to do two Giants in one segment. So this is already heading to dumpster fire territory, but I like Evan Ingram. It's 3,500 again. The Giants have just been so banged up, but the reason I really like Ingram here is he started the season so poorly, but his last two games, the Giants are starting to use him downfield more. So 12 yards per reception, and then last week without Jason Garrett, 15 yards per per reception. This is the traditional role where we've seen Evan Ingram really thrive when they use him for those jump balls downfield in mismatches. Again, I have no fear of attacking this Chargers defense, because what they do is they make some plays, they look good for stretches, and then they allow some ridiculous, long plays and big chunk yardage. I think Ingram can get off in this spot. His targeting's been very consistent as well, and he's only 3,500. You look down in this range, he's grouped with guys who just don't get consistent targeting at all. So, based on that fact alone, I think he's a good value down there at 3,500. Evan Ingram.
All right, Gary, and which tight end are you going with?
So we've talked a lot about that Buffalo-Tampa game. I think this is a pretty good spot to attack with Gronk. Since he's come back from injury, he's just looked absolutely incredible. It's like he's got a time machine. He had 8 targets, 9 targets, 8 targets in the 3 games we've seen him since that little break. And he's really he's continued to be a massive red zone threat for Tom Brady and this Buccaneers offense. Maybe this is a week where we just see Mike Evans really go off. We didn't see the Patriots exploit or even try to exploit the fact that Tre'Davious White is not playing for Buffalo for the remainder of the season. So this might be the week where that happens, and maybe it's Evans who reaps the reward, especially in the red zone. But with the way Gronk's being utilized right now, $6K doesn't feel like all that much to spend.
All right, Matt, tight end, who do you like?
So I don't know which guy it's going to be, but I like whoever's starting for the Raiders. We know that Darren Waller missed last week, and he may be able to get back on the field. He's 6,400, and I think with a lot of the value that probably opens up at running back and receiver, it'll be pretty easy to pay up for Travis Kelce, pretty easy to pay up for George Kittle, who had a huge game, and then there's cheaper guys like Jared Cook, and then John Bates, who's now going to be the only tight end, I think, that's playing for Washington. So in that mid-tier, if Waller's playing, I think at 6,400, the injury concerns might scare some people off. And then if he's not, we have Foster Moreau at $4,000, who was the chalk last week for a little bit cheaper than that. But he wasn't very good. And I think that people are going to look elsewhere this week. So either of those guys, if one of them's starting, whichever it is, that's the guy I'm going with.
All right, Gary, I need a value play from you. Where are you going for this one?
So Matt mentioned earlier that the great thing about starting Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, and I guess there might only be one, is that if you're going to game stack, it's a very affordable game stack. So I think really you can't go wrong in terms of Jacksonville wide receivers. I would lean to Laviska Shenault. He's $4,300. But even Laquan Treadwell really has been leading that team in receptions the last couple of weeks. They're not huge numbers. Again, this is Jacksonville's passing offense, but you've got Shenault at 4.3, Treadwell at 3.4. If that's your stack with Lawrence at 5.1, you can really afford to do whatever you want on this slate.
All right, Matt, what do you want to do with value on this slate?
So I'll take a little bit of a guess on the running back injury news. Melvin Gordon, I think, is less likely to play than to play, or to not less likely to play than to not play. And Javonte Williams is coming off this monster game in prime time against the Chiefs, and he's $5,900. And this week they get a home game against the Detroit Lions. So if there's no Gordon, I'm not saying that you have to play Javonte Williams, because I think that's what everyone will do, but this is the decision point. This will be the chalk running back if there's no Gordon. Even if Gordon plays, I think Williams could make a lot of sense. Like $5,900 for a guy that seems to be emerging as a dominant running back. He's had 2 really good games in a row, 20 fantasy points, followed by the 33 fantasy points he put up against Kansas City. Whether or not you want to play Williams, I think it's important to know that this is the guy that people are looking at this week.
All right, Jeff, close it down with your value pick.
So, I'm going to touch on both those games the guys mentioned, because I think there's a couple different ways you can think about it. If you're interested in game theory, I think if DeAndre Swift sits, Denver really hasn't been that good at stopping the run over the last few weeks. And I think Jamal Williams could be just a good, a lower owned pivot than Javonte Williams, give you good leverage on that game. But I think the real value spot is the Tennessee running backs. I like the idea of the Jacksonville wide receivers. I was going to bring up Shenault as well, but I think it's a tough situation to figure, but Dontrell Hilliard has been the one who's taken more snaps over the last 2 weeks combined, who's very, very productive on just 12 carries, obviously, in his last game out. And, he's going up against Jacksonville. So one of these cheap Tennessee Titans running backs, and I know, most guys, the guys don't like Tennessee, but, they're still a better team than Jacksonville. There's a very good chance one of these running backs finds the end zone here, and they're very cheap. So I think the Tennessee running back situation, I'll make Hilliard my top pick there, but realistically, both him and Donta Foreman could be really good values this week.
All right, that'll do it for football for now. Hitting the hardwood when we return. Say hello to DraftKings contributor Nick Fryer and RotoWire's Nick Whalen. Fellas, it's chase or fade time. So agree or disagree with the following DFS or sportsbook plays on tonight's small 3-game NBA slate. So the Nets head to Dallas to face the Mavericks. Luka Doncic is questionable with an ankle injury. He missed Saturday's loss to the Grizzlies. With that injury, he's the most expensive player on this 3-game slate. So if he's in, are you chasing him tonight, Nick F?
No, I'm not going to chase him tonight. If I'm going to pay up for anybody at guard in this game, it would end up being James Harden. But when it comes to Doncic, the biggest reason being is we saw a little slip in production last game, and he's dealing with those 2 injuries now. He's got a thumb thing as well. So I have a hard time investing too much money when there are other good high-priced options at guard tonight. Harden being one of them. There's another guy who we'll talk about a little bit later. I can't put my faith in Luka tonight. However, if Luka doesn't go, then instead of James Harden from this game, if there's one guard I'm going to pay up for, or pay for in particular, it's going to be Jalen Brunson at 5.2K because the Nets aren't the best against opposing point guards. So no Doncic tonight, but if he doesn't play, look for Brunson.
All right, Nick W., what's your take on this one?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to pay up for Luka tonight. You have Harden, like Nick said. You have Kevin Durant, you have AD, you have LeBron, you have Russ, even DeJounte Murray is approaching $10,000 on this slate. So you have a lot of elite options. But if he does play, I think I'm comfortable chasing Luka here. He practiced on Monday, so that's a really good sign. I mean, chances are he's probably not going to be 100% with those 2 injuries, but he's a guy who typically is comfortable playing through ailments like that. The counting stats have just been extremely good lately for Luka. He's dipped below 54 DraftKings points just twice in his last 11 games. It's a decent matchup for the Mavs. Should be a pace-up game against the Nets team that ranks 10th in pace coming into tonight. So if, and in my mind, when Doncic is cleared, I think you're justified in using him.
All right, the Mavericks are home underdogs here by 4 points. Obviously, the Luka news has a big impact on this line. So would you chase anything in this game now, Nick W., or are you going to fade it completely until the Luka news comes out?
Yeah, if anything, I think I'm chasing the Nets here. Regardless of the Luka news, obviously, if he's out, that makes me like Brooklyn a little bit more. But the Mavs have dropped 4 straight games at home. One of those was without Luka Doncic, but he was active for the other 3, and a couple of those were not particularly close, and 2 of them were not against great opponents. So Dallas has been a little bit shaky at home. I think the Nets are the much better team overall. Mavs are 500 on the year, but they have a negative net rating on the season. Neither of these teams have particularly strong ATS records when you look at the entire year, but Dallas has been particularly bad at home. They're just 3-8 against the spread through 11 home games. Nets are 4-4 as a road favorite, so maybe not a ton to take away there. But with Luka Doncic banged up, I think that does push me towards Brooklyn tonight.
All right, where does it push you, Nick F.?
I think the only game outcome bet that I would look at right now with Luka's status up in question would probably be the money line stuff, but not quite as much value there if you're going to go back the Nets. But yes, I would, if I'm going to back one, it would be the Nets. Same for the spread too, but again, I'd rather wait to see what's going on with Luka, and then the game total wouldn't even touch that. My favorite bet in this game is James Harden's points and assists at over 29.5. I was trying to figure out where exactly I wanted to go with James Harden because I always like his points, assists, and rebounds total. Sprinkling over for his triple double is always an option too, and then the double double tonight too was a pretty similar payout to his points and assists. But I'd rather just go straight up for the 30. I'm sorry, it was 31.5, not 29.5. And Harden's averaging 9.5 assists a game this season. 8 out of his last 10, he's had at least 8 assists. And even when he scores, we see that he's dishing out a ton of assists because he's popped off for some points in these last few games. Against the Mavericks over the last 3 seasons, he's averaging 33.2 points per game and just over 8 assists per game. And last time he was in Dallas too, he dropped 49 on them. So I'm going to go with Harden and the over in his points assists at 31.5.
All right, Nick F. Knicks in San Antonio to take on the Spurs. DeJounte Murray is coming off back-to-back 50 fantasy point outings. Is he a guy that you got to chase in this game?
Yeah, Nick, and the Knicks talking about DeJounte Murray. Yes, I am big on DeJounte Murray tonight. As much as the Knicks have been good against opposing point guards from a fantasy standpoint, I don't necessarily expect an upset in this one. I know we'll talk about this game from a betting standpoint in a second, but the Knicks are a mess right now. They're trying to figure out what they want to do. Obviously, Kemba Walker out of the rotation, but they've had some hard-fought games, but they haven't necessarily come out on the right side of them. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit more more later. When it comes to DeJounte Murray, the biggest thing, of course, he's been playing well. And when you look at strong opposing guards have done against the Knicks recently, those opposing point guards have done well. Trae Young came just shy of 50 DK fantasy points. James Harden had 65 against the Knicks, and then Chris Paul had a double-double. So yes, the Knicks are tough against weaker opposing point guards, but DeJounte Murray is not a weaker guard, so I have no problem backing him tonight.
Yeah, Nick W., you already mentioned you like this guy.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Nick F did a great job of summing it up. I mean, he's been fantastic of late at scoring. Obviously, one of the best, if not the best, guard rebounder in the NBA. The assists have been there. Seems like he has multiple steals pretty much every single night. So the nice thing about Murray is that if he has an off shooting night, he's going to produce those other categories to kind of buoy that fantasy value. I really like him tonight against the Knicks. I mean, the Knicks are 22nd in defensive rating coming into this game. That's not what we've come to expect from Tom Thibodeau coach teams, but they're kind of lost right now. I mean, you're dropping Kemba Walker from the rotation. You got a guy who's really never played a lot of point guard in Alec Burks now functioning as your starting point guard. Julius Randle kind of looks lost. So I think it's a good time for San Antonio and DeJounte Murray to catch this Knicks team.
So the Knicks are the road favorite in this one by 2.5 points. New York is 6-4 against the spread on the road this year. Nick W., are you chasing them to cover tonight?
I don't think I am. Like I said, I don't really know what to make of the Knicks right now. They come into tonight having lost 3 straight. They were blown out at home by the shorthanded Nuggets on Saturday. Still trying to figure out that backcourt rotation, how they're going to kind of proceed with no Kemba Walker. I want to take the Knicks. The records indicate they're the better team. They're certainly the deeper roster, but I think I'm going to chase the Spurs here. They got a win over Golden State on Saturday. That's a nice feather in your cap victory. They played Phoenix really tough last night, ended up losing that one by just 4 points. I know it's a tough back-to-back for the Spurs, but the Knicks are just 1-3 against the spread this season when they have the rest advantage. So that's not necessarily something that you look to as a huge plus for New York. San Antonio 4-3 against the spread as a home underdog, 5-3 against the spread against Eastern Conference opponents this season. So as much as I kind of want to back the Knicks here, they're coming off 2 days rest. The numbers are more so pointing me towards San Antonio.
All right, Nick F., where are you going?
Yeah, I'm really questioning myself, not necessarily just because of what Nick said, as much as his analysis was great. I just don't like the idea of backing the Knicks to do anything positive. Yet I find myself thinking they're going to cover tonight because as much as I like to pick on them, as much as they've been a mess, of course, lost some big games recently, or some important games recently. They did put up a good fight against the Nets. They did mount a comeback against the Bulls after that abysmal first half. And then, and I know the Nuggets game didn't exactly go all that well, but I still like the Knicks in this one. In the Spurs, haven't exactly been an impressive team this season. Of course, Nick talked about the 2-night rest for the Knicks, the back-to-back for the Spurs. Those are huge for me. And then when you look at with the Spurs, they're not the most efficient offensive team. When you look at the 4 of the last 5 teams that the Knicks have faced, 4 of them rank in the top 8 in offensive efficiency this season. So that's going to make a big difference for them. As much as the Knicks aren't as defensively efficient, the Spurs are going to make life a little bit easier for them. So I'm picking the Knicks to cover in this one.
All right, Celtics Lakers tonight at the Crypto.com Arena. Jason Tatum and LeBron James are both averaging over 50 DK fantasy points per game over their last 3. LeBron going to cost you 9,900 on tonight's 3-game slate. Tatum is 9,400. Chase one and fade the other, Nick F.
Yeah, well, I don't ever want to back LeBron if I don't have to. In this case, I don't feel at all compelled to. I'm going to go with Jason Tatum. This is absolutely a much easier pick if Jaylen Brown doesn't play tonight. He is questionable. Tatum went off for 65 DK fantasy points against the Lakers without Jaylen Brown last month, but still, he's done well with Jaylen Brown in the lineup. And of course, him missing time, being questionable, Tatum's still going to have to run the show. Over the last 3 seasons against the Lakers, Tatum has averaged 29.8 points per game, shooting 55.2% from the floor, averaging 7 rebounds, 3 assists, and just over a steal per game. And even when you go and just focus on how he's done in LA, the numbers dip a little bit, but they're still really good. It's 27 points per game, and he's still shooting 50% from 3 in LA over the last 2 seasons. I think it was he's played a couple games there, and then inside the arc too, he's still shooting well over 50% there too. So Jason Tatum over LeBron tonight for sure.
All right, Nick W., what do you think?
I feel like DraftKings should maybe be converting these salaries to Bitcoin in honor of Crypto.com Arena. So you can get LeBron I actually did the research here this morning. You can get LeBron at 0.19 Bitcoin or Jason Tatum at 0.18
Wow.
Bitcoin. I'm gonna join Nick F here and go with Tatum. For one, LeBron is kind of splitting the load with Russell Westbrook and Anthony Davis. LeBron's been, quietly really productive when he's been out there. He's just missed so much time that it feels like he's having a bad year. But like Nick F said, potentially no Jaylen Brown for Boston. It hasn't really looked great since he's come back from that hamstring issue. He's been limited in a lot of those games, was visibly grabbing at the hamstring during that last game. So it doesn't make you feel great about his status for tonight. And meanwhile, Tatum has back-to-back 30-plus point games, 31.3 points, 10.7 rebounds, 3.7 assists over his last three. So he's bounced back in a big way after that kind of up and down start to the season. And again, LeBron's just been a little bit more difficult to trust in this spot. The Lakers overall have been a difficult team to trust. So I'll roll with Tatum and save the $500 or the 0.0096 Bitcoin.
Wow, love that conversion rate. The Lakers are the favorite at home tonight, but some numbers favor the Celtics in this one. Underdogs have won 4 of the Lakers' last 5 games. Also, the Celtics have covered the spread in each of their last 6 games against LA. So chase or fade Boston at plus money tonight, Nick W.
I'm absolutely chasing it. I mean, the Lakers have been impossible to trust against teams with any sort of a pulse, and even against some teams like the Sacramento Kings and the Oklahoma City Thunder, who very much don't have pulses. So I don't know how you could feel good about backing the Lakers regardless of the situation. Then you look at the ATS records, and Boston is 6-2 against the spread against the Western Conference. They're 9-4-1 against the spread on the road this season. And perhaps even more damning is that the Lakers are just 3-12 against the spread as a favorite this season, home or on the road. That's by far the worst mark in the league. They're also 4-11 against the spread overall at home this season. Everything to me is pointing towards Boston covering the 2.5.
All right, Nick F., what do we think?
Yeah, I think Nick broke it down great. I'm actually going to go with Celtics money line on this one, though, and I feel like we should have Julian on this segment because we're both backing the Celtics. Got to get the trifecta. But on top of what you said, Jesse, about the numbers favoring the Celtics, you look at what they've done recently, too. They won that hard-fought game against Philly, of course, a low-scoring game in that one, and they've had back-to-back strong offensive showings since then. But my favorite bet in this one still isn't necessarily the Celtics money line, as much as that is the option I'm going to go with when we're talking about win-loss. Jason Tatum's point total, I take the over on that one. On top of the stuff that I mentioned earlier, he's coming off back-to-back 30-plus point games. If Brown's not in tonight, of course, that helps immensely. And even in that low-scoring game against Philly, he came just shy of hitting the over on this total. He had 26 points in that game, too. So I still expect there to be points in this one. So Jason Tatum's going to be running the show for the Celtics in that regard. So I'd take the over on his points.
All right, good stuff. Thanks, you two. On to hockey after this quick break. Welcome back to The Sweat, and welcome to our NHL panel. RotoWire's Paul Bruno and AJ Scholes, along with Pete Jensen, host of the NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast for NHL Morning Skate. All right, getting a DFS preview of tonight's 10-game NHL slate. So let's start with your favorite high-priced DFS option tonight. McDavid is the top-priced option. He was actually held pointless last time out against the Kings. So, Paul, what do you think?
You know what? I've had my best year in DFS play this year. I'm going to give you guys a couple of tips today. I'm feeling that good, that generous. First of all, when I set my daily lineups, I always start with the high price options who have been the best matchup tonight and are on a recent strong scoring streak as well. Tonight, I find at least one issue that's a hindrance or a big obstacle for each of the top options until I get down to Steven Stamkos. He and the Lightning visit Montreal, one of the softest opponents in the league right now. Stamkos is going to build on the 12 points he's accumulated in the last 10 games. It's that simple.
All right, is it that simple, AJ?
Well, I'm going to look a little bit further down. I don't know if he's still technically high priced, but Artemi Panarin comes in at 7,200 tonight. He's got 5 multi-point games in his last 7 contests. The Blackhawks haven't been the same pushovers they were at the start of the season. They've allowed just 2.4 goals per game in their last 5 contests. But for their part, New York's offense has been humming along to the tune of 3.4 goals in their last 5, plus a 25% power play conversion rate. I think Panarin continues to produce with that number 1 man advantage.
All right, Pete, what do we think?
I'm going with Kirill Kaprizov for the Minnesota Wild. This guy has been one of the top performers in the league over the past 3 weeks of the season. From a scoring standpoint, his line with Ryan Hartman and Matt Zuccarello is one of the hottest in the league for sure. And I just step back and look at Kaprizov. He's out for some respect, for some attention in this matchup against Edmonton and Draisaitl and McDavid. Let's be real about it. He's tied for 5th in the NHL in scoring. I don't think anybody out there, even if they appreciate what Kaprizov has done in his first season and a half or so, scoring-wise, I don't think people view Kaprizov in the same light as McDavid and Draisaitl. Here is his stage to prove it, and he plays with Ryan Hartman, who I mentioned is an absolute beast. So 18 points and 68 shots in his past 19 games for Hartman. So, yeah, I'm stacking Kaprizov and Hartman against the Oilers. The Oilers are a great team this year, but they're a little flimsy sometime in the goals allowed category. I could see this be a high-scoring game, and Kaprizov maybe out-dueling the other 2 guys in Edmonton.
All right, how about your favorite value play, AJ?
Well, for me, in terms of value, I'll give you 2 guys tonight, and it's going to be bargain bin for both of them. Starting with Kyle Okposo of the Buffalo Sabres. He's just 3,100 tonight. He's on a 6-game point streak for Buffalo, and they're going up against Anaheim, who I'll talk more about when we get further into the show, but they haven't been playing great is all you really need to know. And then really scraping the bottom of the barrel, you can get Wayne Simmons for 2,700 for the Leafs. He's going to get first crack at playing with Matthews on that top line with Mitch Marner headed for injured reserve. He's also got 5 points in his last 6 games as well. So some huge discounts on some guys that actually have been producing of late.
All right, Pete, your favorite value play, what is it?
It may be a little bit more obvious, but the guy's still in the $3,000 range, and it's the same team that AJ was just talking about. It's Michael Bunting for the Toronto Maple Leafs playing with Matthews. He scored a power play goal the other day. He's got 10 points in his past 7 games. And he's only 3,900 in DraftKings. So when you talk about ride the hot hand, you look for that exposure to the elite talent. And I definitely like Michael Bunting for still a very moderate price. I'm looking for him to get bumped up in the next couple of days in the price category on DraftKings. Hasn't happened yet, so continue to ride the hot hand with Bunting.
All right, Paul, hit me with a value play.
Look at these guys jumping on the Leaf bandwagon with me. How about that, eh? I'm looking elsewhere. I'm going to look to Blake Batherson for $4,500 in this spot because he's enjoyed a career-best breakout season with 20 points in his first 18 games played, 12 of those coming in the last 10 games. He gets a favorable matchup at home against the reeling Islanders, who are mired in an 11-game winless streak. I also like the Preds' Ryan Johansson, who's enjoying a nice bounce-back campaign after struggling offensively for the past 2 seasons. He's been maligned by AJ and me on our podcast for all of that period, so I got to show him some love. He's had 19 points in 24 games so far this season, has points in 7 of his last 8 games, and still only costs $4,100 against Detroit tonight. And one other tip that I'll share in terms of my own DFS game picks is to see who's the cheapest player on the board who's producing more than 10 DraftKings points per game this season and is also on a scoring streak right now. And tonight, Brandon Saad of the St. Louis Blues fits the bill for $3,200. He has 6 goals and 8 points in his last 10 games played, heading into tonight's action.
All right, let's talk about a line stack that is enticing to you, Pete.
So I'm going to go with the Anaheim Ducks. Very ripe matchup for them against the Buffalo Sabres, who have been scoring a lot of goals, but also giving up way more than they've been scoring the past few games and for the season at large. So I'm going with Trevor Zegras, Sonny Milano, and Ricard Raquel. Look across the board on this line, what they've done lately. Raquel, since coming back from injury, 7 points in 8 games. Sonny Milano, one of the breakout players of the season. He's near a point per game on the season, 19 and 21, and 6 in his past 3 games with 10 shots in the span. And then Trevor Zegras, I mean, this guy has officially pulled even with Lucas Raymond for points per game lead among rookies. He's going to pass him. It's a matter of time. He has 3 straight multi-point games. And I mentioned I like the Wild guys for a pricier stack, but this is the one that could fit into your lineup a lot easier. Get Zegras in there and stack him with either Sonny Milano or Ricard Raquel. Very favorable opponent for one of the biggest surprise stories of the season, the Anaheim Ducks. They just keep rolling.
All right, Paul, how about you? What's your favorite line stack?
Well, I like Pete's stack, but I'll be looking forward to seeing who does better with my line stack in Ottawa tonight. I think that they're even cheaper when you add them all up. It's a total of $14,900 for the trio of Norris, Kachuk, and Batherson, all of them adding up to about 32 points in their last 10 games played in total. I also referred to their opponents, the struggling New York Islanders, and this trio is going to take them to the woodshed tonight. I think it looks like a great matchup for the home side in Ottawa.
All right, AJ, what do you think?
Well, I was going to say the Leafs here, but, Paul's just too cocky about it right now. So instead, I'm going to recommend the Lightning. You've got, first off, the Habs, who have allowed over 40 shots per game in their last 6 contests. So everybody on the Lightning should get at least 1 shot on goal tonight. And then you get this same combination with Toronto and Tampa Bay, where there's one player that's going to cost you a lot, and then his wingers are relatively cheap. Stamkos comes in at 7,200. Palat is more of a mid-range guy at 44. And then Matthew Joseph scrapes the bottom of the barrel at 26. These guys should light up Elvis Merzlikins tonight. Again, though, Toronto, Pete mentioned Bunting. I mentioned Simmons. You throw in Matthews there, and that's a solid play as well.
All right, Paul, what's your favorite game to be high scoring?
Well, I'm hoping the Leafs can hold on tonight. These guys are touting their offense. I don't think that's where I'm looking at all. I see 2 very potent offenses instead in the game in Winnipeg, where the Hurricanes come calling, 2 of the best offenses in the league. And it also features a couple of league's busiest goalies. They're 2 of the best when they're on their game. Right now, neither one of them has been very consistent in their last couple of outings. So I expect the high-octane offenses from both of these clubs to make for a miserable night for both keepers of the net. It could be quite entertaining if these teams trade offensive chances. I'm looking forward to that possibility.
All right, AJ, what do you think?
Well, outside of Toronto versus Columbus and Tampa Bay, Montreal, because I definitely think those are going to be blowouts, I think we could see a lot of scoring in the Edmonton-Minnesota game. Again, Pete mentioned Kirill Kaprizov. The Oilers, for their part, have McDavid and Draisaitl. The Wild have 26 goals in their last 6 contests, and neither one of these teams, is exactly stout defensively right now. So this one could be a high scorer for sure.
Pete, what's your take?
So I think that definitely that Minnesota game, you nailed it, AJ. I mean, there's so much firepower on both sides. One that struck me, though, outside of that box is the Florida Panthers against the St. Louis Blues. When I think of the deepest offenses in the league who have been able to withstand injuries, COVID protocol, whatever it's been COVID protocol lately for the St. Louis Blues that's derailed them. It's been Alexander Barkov's absence and Anthony Duclair's absence for the Panthers, but it hasn't mattered. These are 2 of the top 10 offenses in the NHL still. The Panthers have 13 players with at least 10 points. The Blues have 11 players with at least double-digit scoring. So I do think that matchup definitely tends to, higher scoring. I think that both of those teams are very capable teams in overcoming multi-goal deficits. We've seen it many times recently from these guys. So don't be surprised if one of these teams gets out to a 2-goal lead and then the other one storms back and maybe they get to overtime or something like that. But definitely lands to more offense in that particular game more times than not.
All right, finally, favorite team to win tonight, AJ?
Well, I was going to go with Buffalo against the Ducks here. The Ducks are coming in on a back-to-back. They went with Gibson last night and are getting – so you'll get Anthony Stolarz tonight. So I think it's a good opportunity for Buffalo. But just coming across the news, it looks like, not confirmed, but it looks like Kevin Lankinen might go for the Blackhawks tonight, which means for me, I'm all on the Rangers across the board. Get them in your DFS lineups for sure. And I think the Rangers can pull off a big win tonight.
All right, what do we think? Favorite team to win tonight, Pete?
I mean, the obvious one is Tampa Bay against Montreal, 6th in points percentage for Tampa Bay, despite playing without Kucherov and Braden Point for the past few weeks, of course. And, you know, I think Tampa Bay has just continued to show that they are, they're number 3 in the league in PDO, shooting percentage plus save percentage at 5-on-5. They're just such a safe team in this matchup. So the chances of them winning by, say 2 goals or more, extremely high in that matchup. It's actually a Stanley Cup final rematch. A lot of people forget about that, which is strange because they're in the same division. But look for Tampa Bay to continue what they've been doing, what they did to Philly over the weekend. That's a comparable here. Could be another blowout in Montreal. Even though those guys are missing, Stamkos, Hedman, and Vasilevsky, if he starts, is more than enough to take care of Montreal here.
All right, Paul, what do you think?
You know what? The guys have touched on a few games with the higher win probability for the better teams, but I'm going to try and win people some money. I want to go to a game that's not the biggest attraction and a bit more of a toss-up in the schedule by a long shot, actually, and that's the Ducks' visit to Buffalo. We've highlighted the Ducks' consistent and potent offense that has 17 goals in their last 4 games, averaging over 3.3 on the season, one of the tops in the league. Meanwhile, the Sabres have given up 23 goals against their last 4 games and will likely start Aaron Dell in goal. He has an unsightly 4.51 goals against an average. I called for Zegras, Terry, and company to go wild tonight against the Sabres.
All right, good stuff, guys. One more break to go, one more block to go here on The Sweat. Football is back one more time after this. NFL panel is here to close the show. DraftKings contributors Jeff Ulrich and Darian Thorne. So guys, let's jump into NFL high or low. So are the following Week 14 spreads too high or too low? So Thursday Night Football this week, Vikings favored by 3 hosting Pittsburgh. Minnesota just lost to the Lions and Pittsburgh just beat Baltimore. So is Minnesota favored by too much here, Jeff?
No, I don't think they're favored by too much. I mean, I think you look at these two teams, and it's kind of like the Spider-Man GIF. Like they're basically just pointing at each other. These are teams who just fail to kind of get over that hump in like obvious spots. I mean, Minnesota did it last week. Pittsburgh, getting blown out in a couple games before. Pittsburgh's coming off the emotional big win, though, and I think that's the reason why you're seeing this only at 3. This is basically saying these two teams are exactly equal. If this was on a neutral field, it'd be a pick 'em, but I think you've got to give a slight edge to the Vikings. I mean, I'm no Vikings backer here, but this offense is better than Pittsburgh's. Their defense can certainly pick it up in spots, and I think the metrics kind of say that too. I think this line should be a little bit bigger. And also, if you're betting this game, I mean, I do like the Vikings here. They're 20-10 since 2017 ATS after a loss. This is a good spot for the Vikings to bounce back. It's typically what they've done after a bad loss, and I think they'll do it here. So I think this spread's a little bit too low. Should be more in favor of the Vikes.
Gary, do you agree?
I'm going to say it's slightly too high, but I really echo the sentiments of Jeff here. This is two teams that are just inherently flawed. They're very similar in the sense that they are completely confounding and very disappointing. But at the same time, the book on Kirk Cousins has always been he just doesn't cover spreads against teams above 500. He doesn't cover spreads at home a lot of the time. In fact, the Vikings, 2-7 ATS their past 9 home games, 1-9 ATS their past 10 games as a favorite. They're just not a trustworthy team. And I'm not really saying the Steelers are, but I think the Steelers defense is the one unit I really feel comfortable just trusting entirely in this spot. You look at the Vikings defense, not only are they 29th against the run, according to DVOA, which really should help the Steelers in what they'd like to do, they also give up a ton of chunk plays in the passing game, the third most 20-plus yard passing plays to opponents so far this season. So we know that Ben can be, what's the nice way of saying it, methodical as he moves down the field. There's a chance they could actually get some chunk plays to Claypool and to Deontay Johnson in this contest. So I'll lean towards the Steelers, but I don't feel great about it.
Gary, and Washington is on a roll. Winners of 4 straight, hosting Dallas in a big divisional game on Sunday. Dallas is a 4-point favorite. Do you think that's too high or too low?
I think it's too low. I think the thing we have to notice about Dallas is that they are basically the best against the spread team in football this season. They've been especially fantastic on the road. They are 5-1 ATS in road games. So if you just kind of line these two teams up, I think Dallas should be able to just score some points, and I don't think Washington will be able to keep up. Washington's actually moved the ball pretty well so far this season. They are averaging the 8th most yards per drive in the NFL. However, they are only 20th in points per drive, and the reason for that is they are only averaging 4.11 points per red zone trip. That is dead last in the NFL. This team can just not score in those high leverage opportunities. And we've really seen that with the way some of these scores have looked recently. I just can't trust Tyler Heineke and the rest of this Washington team to put up points and keep pace with Dak Prescott, especially considering this Cowboys offense is, I mean, as close to healthy as we've seen it in a long time. I know there's some concerns, obviously, with Zeke, but a Zeke injury might actually be good for Dallas because Tony Pollard's just a better player.
All right, Jeff, what do we think? Should Dallas be favored by more here?
Kind of a good last point by Gary. And I actually think that Dallas, I think this line is actually a little bit too big. Like, I think you need to give Washington a little bit of respect here. And again, I mean, I think Dallas on the whole, sure, they're a slightly better team, but Washington's defense, who we all thought was going to be an elite unit at the start of the year, they've started to pick things up a little bit. They've solidified it a little bit in the secondary. If you actually look at like yards per attempt and what these two teams have allowed, Dallas has been the worst team against the pass over the last few games. Washington has improved in that area. And again, I think people forget, like, Mike McCarthy is still the coach of the Cowboys. And we saw that play out in the last game where, like, he would not take Zeke off the field, despite Zeke obviously not being 100% healthy. If that plays out again here, I just feel like Washington is a good enough team with a better coaching situation, Ron Rivera, and an improving defense that they'll take advantage, that they will make Dallas at least play a very, very close game. I think with Washington going on the road, winning a close game against the Raiders last week. And yeah, Garen's right. Like, they're not a perfect team either, but I think the spread should be closer to 3 than 4. And I'm going to say it's just a little bit too high in favor of the Cowboys right now.
All right, the Chiefs host the Raiders on Sunday. KC has shown recently that they're back to being the class of the AFC. They're favored by 9.5 at home. Too high or too low, Jeff?
Oh man, it's got to be too high, right? I mean, I get it. Like, the Chiefs have been covering these. They're kind of just doing it, and they're like, well, now the offense is going to start playing better. They're going to be beating people by 50 points. But when is that going to happen? I mean, and also, like, this defense, I don't know. Is it a little bit of smoke and mirrors? Like, they played Teddy Bridgewater last week. Did they really have to do that much? I don't know. I feel like KC is still really kind of having trouble just getting it all together. And the Raiders here, back against the wall. I know they can't run the ball, but again, I think the way to attack Kansas City anyways is try and get in shootouts right now because they're kind of having trouble putting points up themselves. So I kind of like this spot for the Raiders to bounce back here. A big piece is going to be whether Darren Waller is healthy or not. If Darren Waller can play in this game, I definitely like Vegas at 9.5. I'd love to see it get up to 10, but I'm going to say this one is a little bit too big, and I think you should take advantage by taking the Raiders if it stays around 10.
Gary, do you agree 9.5 just too high?
Yeah. You could have made a lot of money the last couple of years just blindly betting against the Chiefs to cover spreads. They have only covered 3 of their last 13 home games. They've only covered 7 of their last 23 games overall. And as Jeff mentioned, 2 of those covers have been their last 2 games. But those haven't been dominating offensive performances. If anything, they've been dominating defensive performances, so much so that they've had to lean on their defense to score points. I don't know. I just really concerned with that game against the Broncos. I mean, all we ever hear about is how great Andy Reid is coming out of the bye. And he is, don't get me wrong. But you really expected the Chiefs offense to look a little bit more polished against the Broncos with 2 weeks to prepare, and they just did not look good. They needed Daniel Sorensen to run back a 75-yard tipped interception for a touchdown to cover that game. I think Vegas can score. I think at any point a backdoor cover is on the table just because you trust Derek Carr to put up a ton of passing yards. I just can't trust the Chiefs to cover an almost double-digit spread at this point.
Okay, so a big AFC versus NFC showdown in the 4 p.m. window on Sunday. The Bucs 3-point favorites hosting the Bills, coming off that Monday night loss against New England. So what do we think, Gary? And is 3 points too high or too low for the Bucs to be favored?
I think like the dirty little secret about the AFC East this season is that they had the easiest possible schedule you could imagine. I mean, there's a reason that 2 of the longest active winning streaks in football are the Patriots and the Dolphins. They just keep playing terrible teams or keep playing teams in terrible situations in terms of injuries or weather. The first one of these AFC East teams to have like a big statement win, it'll be the first time it's happened this season. I mean, I guess you could say Buffalo's win against Kansas City back in week 5, but it seems like we know a lot more about Kansas City at this point now than we did back then. So I guess you can count that one. But honestly, like I just can't trust an AFC East team outside of their own division at this point. The Buccaneers, they're 4-0 ATS their past 4 home games. I think they're just clearly better than every single team in this division. And it's shown in their non-conference record so far this season. They are undefeated against AFC teams so far in 2021. So I will just take the Buccaneers here. I can't trust the Bills. I can't trust anyone in this division.
All right, Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a really interesting line. I mean, I think you look at it, and if you sit back, you look, long term, you bring in what the Bills did last year. You say that's probably about right, but Garen's right. I mean, like this team, I don't know if you should take like the last couple of years of data. I mean, I was going to throw it, and the Bills are 8-4-1 since 2019 ATS on the road. Like they've been a very good cover team, but I don't know that you can say that like this line is too big in favor of the Bucs or something, and that like, oh, it should be closer to pick them, because that's kind of just sounds ridiculous. Like the Buccaneers are obviously been the better team, the more consistent team this year, and I think they're kind of getting disrespected here. Again, the Buccaneers are a home team here, and they're only getting 3 points. We're basically saying these teams are almost equal, if not equal. I don't think that's the case at all. Strength of schedule, just what these two teams have done this year too, just from a performance perspective. So if anything, I'd say this line is probably just a little bit too small. It probably should be the Bucs should probably just be slightly bigger favorites.
All right, real quick, let's wrap up with the Seahawks in Houston visiting the Texans. Seattle coming off their first win since October. Texans will likely be without Tyrod Taylor in this one. Seahawks favored by 7 on the road. Jeff, too high or too low?
This is way too high. I mean, are you kidding me? You're going to trust the Seattle Seahawks on the road? Oh my God, this team after a win, you go look at Pete Carroll's record over the last 5 years after a win. I'll try and bring it up here really quick. It's not good. The Seahawks are 19-27 ATS after a win covering, and now you're this season with them banged up. No, this one's way too high. There's no way you trust Seattle here.
You agree, Garion?
I don't like doing it. I wouldn't bet this game because then you might accidentally watch some of it. But I'll say it's too low. I just think you have the Lions, who are a special type of terrible, and then you have the Texans and the Jaguars right slightly above them. I know Seattle's been terrible. I can't give you a good stat as to why they should cover this game, but I just don't think Davis Mills is an NFL quarterback. Seattle's offense looked pretty good against San Francisco. I'll take the Seahawks.
All right, that's a show, but stay tuned for the Madden Sim, starting with the Panthers at the Lions at noon, and then check out the Slate at 5 p.m. Eastern for a live preview of tonight's NBA slate. Brendan Glasheen, Sharad Kira, Matt Meiselman will break down all the news, injuries, and lineup changes before lock, and we will see you back here tomorrow at 11 a.m.